Egypt After Arab Spring by Wes in April 2013. On April 8, 2013, National Public Radio carried a news report about the worst violence in a year in Egypt, when both Muslims and Christians were involved in some violence that led to the killing of 8 people and the wounding and injury of many others. Many people might wonder, what is going on in Egypt? And in this presentation, we will examine a few of the things that have happened since the start of the Arab Spring in 2011 and the changing of leadership and the constitution in Egypt, and what is happening and why this is important. Arab Spring happened across the Middle East, and it started in 2011 in Tunisia. But there were many, many countries that were involved, and Egypt was one of the most violent and well-publicized Arab Spring countries. In January of 2011, Hosni Mubarak, who ruled Egypt for almost 30 years, from 1981 until 2011, stepped down, but he did so letting all of the prisoners and criminals out of the prisons and basically leaving the country in a state of chaos. But that happened after a series of protests in Tahrir Square, and this was seen as a real victory for democracy. Finally, in June of 2012, a new president was elected, Mohamed Morsi, and in December of 2012, a constitutional referendum or vote was held, voting on a new constitution in Egypt. And while these events have been seen as a victory for democracy, they've also seen a lot of violence and a lot of struggle. One of the reasons that Arab Spring in Egypt is so important is because there are many, many issues regarding human rights and freedoms at stake in the struggle that we're seeing happen in Egypt. Many have feared that by having a constitution that allows for different parties to participate, there will be extremist groups that will seize power. And many have been fighting to protect the rights of citizens from torture and unlawful imprisonment or imprisonment without a court order. And so when we think about the United States and our Constitution and how that was written and approved in 1787, when it was finally written and then later ratified by the states, we see tremendously important and huge political change happening in Egypt, which isn't just important for that country, but it's important throughout the Middle East. Two of the questions and concerns that people have regarding the Arab Spring and the change in Egypt is whether or not the Muslim Brotherhood, which is the symbol I've tried to draw on the left, and the military of Egypt are going to have a very large role and are going to shape the destiny and future of the country. Many fear that those members of Morsi's government that are from the Islamic Brotherhood are extremists that want to impose Islamic law instead of secular law. The military has been extremely powerful in Egypt for decades. In fact, Hosni Mubarak was an Air Force officer and the chief of the Egyptian Air Force before he became the president for 3 decades. And so many fear that the military is going to rule and democracy will not actually be able to flourish in Egypt. So these are big issues of concern. Another main issue which this brings to light is the question of whether or not Christians can coexist peacefully with Muslims or those who follow the Islamic faith. And the violence which we saw in April in Cairo and Egypt, which actually followed the deaths of several of the Coptic Christians, which is a sect of Christianity there in Egypt, was a very tragic event. And in a diverse society like Egypt, it is vitally important that people be committed to peaceful change and not resorting to violence to seek change, and that we find peaceful ways to coexist and to be able to live together as people, even when we have different beliefs. The future of Egypt is far from determined, and it will be important to continue following the events that are happening and, in some ways, supporting those who are struggling for democracy and human rights and a better future, not only in Egypt, but throughout the Middle East.